guys, welcome back to Queens of the Damned Horror Podcast. This week we are continuing with our Decades series and we talk about 1940s horror. Rachel starts the discussion with the Cat People. Nikki goes into the Wolfman, and I ended the conversation with the Picture of Dorian Gray. Hope you guys enjoy it.
For my movie, I chose Cat People, which was released in 1942. It's produced by a man named Val Lewton and directed by Jacques Tourneur. Val Lewton is kind of a legendary horror producer from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was put in charge of RKO, their horror department, and basically given zero money and was told, you know, these Universal horror movies are huge hits, so we need our own hit horror movies. So he started making basically movies on a shoestring budget, which meant that he had to be extremely creative. I'm not really going to get into Val Lewton, but he's a really interesting guy. So if anyone wants to learn any more about him, there's this really great podcast called You Must Remember This, which is an old Hollywood podcast. And one of her first episodes is about Val Lewton. And it's really, really well done. And he's very interesting to learn about. But anyway, Cat People. Cat People is one of my favorite movies. It's one of the most influential horror movies ever made. Cat People is about this Serbian woman named Irina who has immigrated to New York. And one day she's at Central Park Zoo looking at the panthers. And she meets this engineer named Oliver, who is, of course, American. And she invites him over to her apartment for tea. And once they're at her apartment, Oliver sees this statue of a medieval warrior impaling a panther with his sword. And so Irina tells him this legend about King John of Serbia. And according to legend, a long time ago, the Christian residents of her home village ended up turning to witchcraft and devil worship after they were enslaved by the, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Mamelukes? It's a real historical group that basically invaded Serbia and enslaved a lot of the people. So when King John drove the Mamelukes out of Serbia, he saw what the villagers had become and he had them all executed. But one of them escaped and cursed any descendants of that village that if they are aroused to any kind of passion, they will transform into a panther. So Irina lives with this fear that she is going to transform into a panther. Oliver, of course, is just like, whatever, yeah, sure, you simple people. Of course you believe that. And he convinces her to marry him. After their wedding, they are having their, reception at a Serbian restaurant. And the servers continually come up to Irina and speak to her in Serbian. And she's just getting increasingly terrified. So finally they leave. And for a few months into the marriage, Oliver is kind of trying to persuade Irina to have sex with him. They're married. She won't do it. She's so afraid to have sex with him because she thinks she's going to turn into a panther. So eventually he persuades her to see a psychiatrist, Dr. Judd. Judd basically tries to convince her that she's afraid of nothing, she's not going to turn into a panther, all this kind of stuff. And Irina starts to feel a little bit better, so she goes to visit Oliver at work. And when she gets there, she discovers that he has confided all of this to a coworker named Alice, who is in love with him. And when Irina arrives, Alice is confessing her feelings. And Oliver, to his credit, says, no, I'm married, I love my wife. But does he? So Irina starts to follow Alice home. And this is one of the scariest scenes that I've ever seen. I mean, Alice is walking and she hears a noise and she stops. And it's silence. And then she starts walking a little faster, and then she hears sounds, and she stops, and it's silence. And it just keeps going and going and going. And finally, the camera just zooms in on her face as you hear what sounds like a hissing sound. And she turns around, and it's a bus. It's the brakes of a bus. And it totally freaks you out because it just really tricks you. So after she gets on the bus, like a groundskeeper of the park that she was walking through finds several sheep that have been killed, and in the blood of the sheep are paw prints that slowly turns into imprints of women's shoes. So Irina is back at her apartment now, and she's really upset because she feels like Oliver is going to leave her. So she ends up going to see Dr. Judd again. And he basically sexually assaults her. He grabs her and he kisses her. And his excuse is that he's trying to snap her out of it. And then all of a sudden he just starts screaming. And Oliver and Alice arrive at his office and he's dead. And then you cut to Irina, who has gone to the zoo. She opens the panther's cage. The panther that she was looking at when Oliver first met her, and it attacks her and kills her, and that's how the movie ends. So one of the big themes of this movie is the fear of female sexuality. So I don't know if you guys are really familiar with the Hays Code and what that was.
No.
Okay, so it was like a moral code that was enforced in Hollywood for a long time. And there were certain rules.
Oh.
And one of the big rules was, there was no sex on camera.
I feel like we talked about this before.
We probably talked about it in the last Decades episode we did, because some of those would have been like pre-code movies. Yeah.
Okay.
But in any case, this story was a clever way of getting around not being able to talk about these kinds of things. I mean, Irina is so afraid of giving into passion that she ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. If she had just given into it, all of that anger and pent-up frustration wouldn't have bubbled and bubbled and bubbled and made her actually turn into the panther. So it's actually a pretty, I always regard it as a pretty feminist movie. Another good thing that this movie does, again, they had no budget. RKO gave them like $100,000 to make this movie. So they had no budget for special effects. So you never actually see her turn into the panther. All you see are shadows, you hear sounds, you see the paw prints that turn to a woman's shoe. But it's much scarier not seeing like a giant fake cat on screen. So it's just really interesting the way that they got around not really having any money for an actual panther. And then again, the scene with the bus where Alice is being followed, that's a pretty influential scene. That was kind of the very first, I guess you could call it like jump scare or fake out scare, when someone's walking down the hallway in a horror movie because they hear something scary and all of a sudden they hear something behind them and they whip around and it's just their friend.
Mm-hmm.
So this bus scene was the first time that had ever happened. And people actually call that kind of scene a Luton bus.
Oh.
Because it was such a successful, because this was such a successful scene that they, people copied it almost immediately. So that's Cat People. There's a really terrible remake that I think Nikki has seen.
Yeah, unfortunately I did
Do not watch it. Pretend it doesn't happen. Watch the original. It's so good. It's great. And watch some of Val Lewton's other movies. He does quite a few really, really, really good ones, which I'm going to do another. I think last time I did a blog post. So I'm going to do another one with all the movies that we couldn't talk about today because we don't have time. There will be a lot of Val Lewton movies on there. So that was it. Guys, watch it. It's so good.
I wish I would have watched the correct one.
It's so good. And and I forgot to mention the lead performance, Simone Simon. She plays Irina. So great. She never plays Irina as crazy. Because it turns out she's not crazy. But, she's just does such a great job of just showing how she's becoming, increasingly upset and worried and just frantic at the idea of not turning into a cat. So it's really good. Curse of the Cat People is the sequel, which is still actually very good. Not as good, but still good.
Huh.
But definitely watch the original and skip the remake that has incest in it, I believe, for some reason.
Is it 1982?
That's it. I think it was made for TV.
It looks bad. I'm just looking at pictures of it.
Yeah, it's really bad. Like, they give her, like, a brother for some reason. Because, like, God forbid that it could just be about her. It also has to be about the brother. There's, like, all this nudity in it. And they're not... Instead of making them Serbian, they make them Creole.
That's an odd choice.
Well, yeah, but see, then they can have, like, mystical black people in it.
Oh, God.
They have Ruby D as a housekeeper whose name is, like, female. It's super fun.
Oh my God.
And there's incest in it, as I said. So, don't watch it, but watch the original, guys. It's so good. It's a little harder to find, I think, on streaming than the remake. Pretty sure that it's on Amazon. You can rent it off Amazon.
So you mentioned the theme of female sexuality in it, and I've been struggling all semester with these so many horror narratives. How do we tell which of them endorse female sexuality as a very powerful thing, and which of them accidentally make it seem scary when it's not supposed to be, so just reaffirming stereotypes and fears? And that's still a question that I can answer on, like, a case-by-case basis, but can't answer in general.
Right.
So I was wondering, what do you think is in the original Cat People that makes it a story about the strength of female sexuality versus the fear?
I don't think that it's about the strength of female sexuality, but it's more about the fact that because society fears it, here's what ends up happening, right?
Okay, so you fear the witch and you created the witch because of your fear.
It doesn't say, like, yeah, Irina should have been, footloose and fancy free this whole time and she would have been fine. It's more like because society is telling her that she, shouldn't be giving into any kind of sexual feelings, passionate feelings. She's so afraid of it that it ends up dooming her in the end. It's definitely more of an examination of how society views women. And I mean, even if you think about it, when you think about women who are, sexually liberated, they're wild animals, they're cougars, all this kind of thing. The way that they describe them is, like, not even human.
It's an expression of fear in a way,
it
too.
is.
And then in a way of, like, endorsing that female sexuality can be scary just because that is a patriarchal construct. It's kind of like going boo in a sarcastic way,
Exactly. And it's definitely, I think that, if she does give in to her desires, she turns into a panther. It is, like you said, society's way of making female sexuality scary. If she becomes her own, like, sexual being, she becomes this scary monster.
I really like that choice. It was on your recommendation that I did see it, but I thought it was the later version that I was supposed to watch, which was my bad. So I watched that one and ruined it for myself. So I need to go see the earlier one.
Watch the original.
It says that you can rent it on YouTube, Amazon, and iTunes.
Yeah.
It's like a classic.
I'm kind of surprised that it's not on Shudder. Okay, who's next?
So speaking of the monster within, I chose The Wolfman, 1941, just a year before Cat People. You said 42 on Cat People, right? Yes, 42. Okay. Quick background on it. It has Claude Rains, Bela Lugosi in a sort of cameo, and then Lon Chaney Jr. Someone very politely explained to me the difference between Lon Chaney and Lon Chaney Jr. Earlier, Lon Chaney, Phantom of the Opera, Lon Chaney Jr., The Wolfman. And he looks super tall in this film, but he's actually only like 6 foot. So I don't know if they just had really short actors there with him or something, but that's one thing I noticed.
I think in the scenes where he's the Wolfman, I'm pretty sure you can see that he's wearing like platforms.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, movie magic.
With his Wolfman outfit.
Oh my god.
So when the film opens, this is one of the big Universal monster movies, as we know. And when the film opens, there's a dictionary entry that cites lycanthropy, which is a disease in which someone imagines that they are a wolfman. And this is kind of a big theme throughout of people telling him he's crazy, he hasn't been bitten by a werewolf, and him knowing that something is up. So it follows Lawrence Talbot, who is kind of this prodigal son who returns to his father's home. I believe it's in Wales. After his brother dies, he has a fatal accident, but I don't think, ever mention what it is. And neither the father nor the son seem like that sad that the brother died. It took me a while to pick up on it, so I don't know what the hell is going on. I love these old movies. I just love them to death. And then, immediately, the father upstairs has this telescope, and Larry, as they call him, is looking through the window of the next door building, and it's obviously this beautiful woman named Gwen's bedroom, and he keeps looking at her. And when he goes next door, I think she or her father owns a, antique shop or something. And he's asking for the pair of earrings she was wearing when he was looking through her window. So then he proceeds to ask her on a date. I swear I love this movie, but I'm going to make a lot of fun of it because there's really funny stuff in it. I love this film. So he's asking her on a date and she's saying no, and apparently no means yes now. And they eventually end up meeting, but first Larry buys a cane from this antique shop, and it has a wolf's head on it, and of course it is made of silver. And in case you had no idea what a werewolf was, because apparently people in 1941 didn't, they engaged in a bit of lighthearted exposition about the werewolf legend. So things like silver can kill it. They don't explicitly say it is a full moon change. I think it's... Help me out here. When is the change precipitated in this film?
I just remember
it's not during
the
full
poem
moon
that says something like when
I'll get there.
Yeah, so just something like
so the poem is
the autumn moon is
even
bright.
A man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolf's bane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. That is, I had to be very careful not to write down the Florence and the Machine lyrics that were adapted. But yes. So then eventually, Larry and Gwen, this woman, and her friend, whose name I can't remember, go down to visit the Romani people who are camping on the edge of town, and they go to get their fortunes told. And Bela Lugosi has a cameo here. And he's almost unrecognizable. If you know him as Dracula, it takes you a while to figure out it's Bela Lugosi. So, another bit of the werewolf mythology is that a werewolf will see a pentagram on his next victim's hand. So Bela here is the original werewolf, and he sees that he's going to eat Gwen's friend from the pentagram that appears on her palm when he goes to read her palm. So he's like, "Okay, thanks, come back tomorrow." And Bela turns into a werewolf. Larry confronts him, and there's this hilarious scene where he looks like he's play fighting with a German shepherd. I don't know what's going on there, but it kind of takes place behind a tree. So the friend gets murdered, and Larry kills Bela Lugosi werewolf with a cane. And when he's dead, he turns back into Bela Lugosi. And now it's a wolf cane murder. And the cops think Larry's crazy and that he killed a dog. He thinks he killed a dog when he killed a person. But did they say wolf explicitly? I killed a wolf? I think they did.
I believe he does.
And then there are these scenes that I can't remember, but I observed that there were cardboard cutout tombstones they were walking by. And dogs don't like Larry anymore after he's been bit. And Bella's mother is visiting his casket or whatever before they bury him. She offers him, she's like the one person in this movie who knows what's up, and I don't know who this actress is, but I love her so much. And she knows he's been bitten, so she gives him a pentagram necklace that's supposed to protect him. He doesn't believe her, of course, at first, but he takes it anyway. And then he sees that his legs are really hairy, which, if that was the case, like a sign of being a werewolf, I would be a werewolf by now.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like me trying to put shorts on for the first time. Yeah.
And my favorite part, when he finally does change into a werewolf, his outfit also changes.
I love this.
So he gets like this wonderful new style and everything.
What I enjoy about the werewolf outfit is that it's like really classy. It's like a really nice button down and some Dockers. It's like not like, it's not even like when the Hulk transforms in the Avengers movies, and we all just accept that he has to wear like these Hulk pants because he can't, have his penis out on screen. But at least they have the courtesy to be like ripped, like his real pants stretched. This is just like a whole new outfit.
Yeah, it's just like, boom, he's a werewolf, and now he's wearing something completely different that fits his obviously broader chest, obviously broader thighs.
To a T.
It's amazing. So even after he goes on his first werewolf rampage, everyone thinks he's a werewolf, which kind of sucks, because that's like Freud being a detective, going like, no, you just really think that you're a wolf. And the quote is, most anything can happen to a man in his own mind. But I don't know, I feel like that's kind of even more of a leap than believing a werewolf exists, because here's like this perfectly healthy person with no history of violence who like all of a sudden thinks, I don't know. Which one would you believe? I have no idea. And then the townspeople, they just really need a scapegoat because of all these murders that are happening. And then the inspectors pull this print. It's a cast of a wolf print, and it's like as big as a dinner plate. So if I ever see a wolf that big, I'm gonna shit my pants. And on his second rampage, he kills a gravedigger, and gets caught in a bear trap, which actually looks really painful. This was part of the movie that I was like into, where I wasn't kind of removing myself from it, going, this is fiction, because ouch. And Bella's mom finds him again. And she has this prayer she says, and I think it was written for the film. She says, the way you walk is thorny through no fault of your own. But as the rain enters the soil, the river enters the sea, so tears run to a predestinate end. Find peace for the moment, my son. And when she says the prayer, he turns back into a human, and she saves him from the people who are hunting him. And then there's this, like, racism that's going on where Larry's father's trying to blame his symptoms on the Romani woman, putting all this superstition into his head. There's definitely some commentary on race going on in this film, although they're still playing into some racial stereotypes, but I think it's a little bit more forward-thinking for the time, even though they're still like, oh, it's the gypsy people and everything. And after a while, Larry convinces his father to take the silver cane, even though his father doesn't believe him. So, he's trying to tell everybody he's dangerous and nobody believes him, basically. And especially Gwen doesn't believe him because she's now fallen in love with him. And she follows him into the forest, and he attacks her, of course. Like, victim blaming is bad, but come on. Like, she knew something was going on, and she went after him, and obviously he was dangerous. So, after a while, the father attacks Larry with the cane, and he turns back to a human after the Romani woman says a prayer again. After he's dead, she says, your suffering is over. Now you will find peace for eternity. And as far as the authorities know, the wolf is still out there and got away. it attacked Gwen, and Larry came to the rescue. So his reputation is preserved at the end. I really like this movie. It's like, while being a cheesy 40s movie, it's got these moments that just kind of stop you. And I've always been like a big werewolf person, so this is one of my favorites.
It's really good. And it spawned some really terrible sequels. Have you seen the sequels?
No, I haven't seen the sequels, but the remake, the 2010 remake, I saw it. A lot of people hated it. I liked most of it until the end.
I liked parts of it.
I didn't even know there was a remake.
It had a good feel. And I got to go to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal when it was themed as classic movies. So I got to see, because they were doing promotion for Wolfman then. So it must have been 2011. It was. And it was amazing. I got to do the Dracula. They had each like haunted house themed differently. So I got to do Dracula, Frankenstein, and the new Wolfman. And they had the Romani camp and everything. And you could smell the fire and everything. And the woman,
So
you would come in
awesome.
and the woman would be like, he's coming. And then you would go through and it was like this, like you were in a ditch and there was earth on both sides of it. And you could hear, they had an actor playing the Wolfman and he was running around up top, like jumping over your head and everything. It was actually pretty frightening. Yeah, that was really, really fun to experience. That might have made me like the remake a little more than I actually would have if I hadn't have gotten to see that.
So with the remake, I feel like they took, like you said, like the brother's death and the original. They're just kind of like, well, he's dead. And, like, nobody ever really gets into it. And I feel like sometimes with remakes, which this one definitely fell in that trap, is that they feel the need to explain everything. Like, I guess until you brought up that they never explained what happened to the brother, it just, like, never dawned on me. Like, it wasn't important to the plot, so they were just kind of like, well, he dead.
No,
he's dead. That's why he's back. And then you just kind of move on.
I liked the way that they tied that in, because they did it in the remake, like right in the beginning of the movie. The first scene, I think, is the brother gets killed by the werewolf, and that's like, there's another werewolf, and that's why he comes back. And I'm like, hey, that's fine. They could have done that little detail. Like, they tied it back into the plot without having to spend too much time on it.
Yeah.
And it was relevant. And then I don't know, it made me think, because I was like, why is he home? And I barely even noticed it was because his brother had died and then they did nothing with it. So I was just like very confused. He was just like, what? Here I am in Wales. Hi, Dad.
Right.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
I needed more on that front a little bit.
I feel like a lot of the time with the Universal movies is it was kind of like, let's keep going. I mean, because movies were not like as long back then as they are now. So, like, you had to get into the plot. And so some of that, like, extra stuff just got pushed off to the side because, like, we got to get this thing moving. And they also were not making those movies on huge budgets.
Yeah, a lot of that exposition came in conversation. So that also is part of it. They weren't showing, like, in the remake, they had such a beautiful atmosphere with, like, the moors and everything, and the werewolf would attack in this like circle of stones that were kind of like Stonehenge, and it was just all very aesthetic. But they couldn't really do that so much in the
yeah, because they had to film it all on a soundstage. But I like the older one better.
I don't know. I need to see the remake again because it's been years.
Even though it's cheesy and not as detailed, I don't know. I just think that it has, like, charm and fun, and it's not so self-serious. No, it's not a comedy, but it doesn't take itself as seriously as the remake does. It's just, like, a fun, scary movie.
Yeah, we don't really have... do we really have just fun, scary movies anymore?
I would call The Conjuring a fun, scary movie.
I think Rob Zombie's movies are just
which is
fun,
probably why I liked it so much, because it reminded
movies.
me of, like, older horror movies that were just... they kind of get into, like, the Jesus-y, like, stuff, but it's just kind of a fun, spooky movie. I don't know. It had some really good jump scares, and then it was like, well, that was good. But I didn't think, like, deeply about it after I left.
So, like, something you just go to, like, get scared and have fun.
Yeah, not everything has to have, like, a deeper meaning or, like, a big twist or that kind of thing. I mean, sometimes scary movies, I think, can just be fun. And you watch it, and that's it.
I'm always going to read into the deeper meaning of it. That's part of the fun that I have,
That's what's fun about movies, is that everybody can enjoy different parts of it, different aspects of it.
But I did appreciate when I did the remake of Evil Dead last episode, or episode before last, because that was one that I just didn't have so much familiarity with, and it was more of a just gore movie. I experienced that in a non-analytical way, and that's something that I don't have happen to me anymore, because I automatically know, like, this is the werewolf myth, this is this is what this means. So, but I wasn't getting that with the Evil Dead when I first watched. I was just, like, reacting viscerally to everything that was happening, and that's a different sort of fun experience.
That is fun.
Yay for all movies of all kinds.
Go, Miranda.
Okay, so I picked The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was made in 1945, and it was adapted from the novel by Oscar Wilde, which came out in 1890. And I actually just read this for my Brit Lit 2 class, so I have some familiarity with it. And the movie actually does a really good job of adapting the book. I don't know if either... Rachel, you've seen it, haven't you?
I sure have. This...
Yeah, because isn't the painting one of your favorites?
The painting is one of my favorites. Yeah. Just as a heads up for anyone who's not familiar, the artist is Ivan Albright. The Art Institute of Chicago is doing a special exhibit starting on Monday for like 2 months of his works. So anyone who would like to come see it definitely should. I am going. I'm so excited.
That's awesome.
We'll post the picture. We'll post the painting on our Twitter account so everybody can see it because it's amazing.
Yes, it is. So, the book and the movie are, like I said, they're very similar. And they kind of follow the same themes of extravagance, manners versus morals, a relationship between art and reality, the differences between science and art, kind of trying to figure out the difference between what is influence and what is domination, and then also the value of youth. Basically, both start out with an artist named Basil, and he is painting a young man named Dorian, and he doesn't want his friend Lord Henry to meet Dorian because he doesn't want him to kind of ruin Dorian's perfection. But of course, Lord Henry does end up meeting Dorian, and he influences him a lot. And so while Basil is painting him, Lord Henry starts spouting his random philosophy, and he does this a lot in the book where it'll just be like pages of him talking what I always felt like was semi-nonsense. Some of the things he would say would make sense, and other things you'd really have to question. But most of it is controversial. It sometimes sounds like he's just saying things that are controversial just to say them. While he's doing this, he convinces Dorian that youth is the only thing worth having. And this is one of the most important themes throughout the book and the movie. So, while Lord Henry is having this conversation with Dorian, Dorian wishes that he would never age and that the painting would age for him. And that's exactly what happens. In the book, it isn't exactly clear how it happens. You just kind of figure he kind of just sold his soul to whatever. But in the movie explains it in a really weird way, and I don't understand where they got this from. But there's a cat statue that keeps showing up, and Basil claims that it's a depiction of an Egyptian god, and you're kind of led to believe that this Egyptian god cat statue is granted Dorian's wish. So after this happens, Lord Henry keeps filling Dorian's head with all these weird ideas, and one of them is also that pleasure is the most important thing in the world, more important than really anything. Lord Henry believes that marriage is a trap, and that you're supposed to have many romances in your life, and that there's no such thing as one love. But of course, Dorian meets and falls in love with Sybil Vane, and he falls madly in love with her, and it's a little more intense in the book, I think. In the movie, it's pretty quick, the way that everything happens. But in the book, it feels like it lasts a little bit longer. But they fall in love, and Dorian is like, I want to say he's like 17 or 18 in the book, and Sybil is around that age as well. So they're both fairly young, but they fall in love, and Dorian, out of nowhere, just decides he's not going to be with Sybil anymore. He sends her a letter, and he breaks up with her. But when Dorian decides that he wants to stay with her instead and tells her that he loves her, he finds out that she's killed herself. So after this, Dorian really goes downhill. He starts living in excess and extravagance. He just becomes entirely immoral. And the next time that we see the painting again, the painting is completely changed. It's monstrous and ugly. It doesn't even look like the original painting of Dorian anymore. Because the idea is that all of the bad things that he's done, it's not affecting his person, it's only affecting the painting. Because after years, it has to be, in the movie, it has to be like 10 to 20 years or something like that. Probably more like 10. And Dorian looks exactly the same, but Basil's niece in the beginning of the movie, who was a child, by the end is a grown woman, and Dorian still looks the same. But this painting is just continuously becoming more monstrous and ugly. So when Basil shows up later on, he wants to see the painting. And Dorian just doesn't want him to see the painting, but he finally decides to take him upstairs to see the painting because Dorian ends up hiding it away because he doesn't want anyone to see it. So out of anger, in the book, it's purely out of anger and frustration with Basil. He blames Basil for everything that's happened to him with the painting, and Dorian stabs and kills him. In the movie, Dorian kills him because he feels like Basil is a threat to his relationship, actually with Basil's niece. He's afraid that he'll tell her about the painting. So he kills Basil, and that's kind of... I don't want to say it's the climax, but it's a pretty big deal in both the movie and the book. But by the end, he swears that he's going to change. He ends the relationship with the woman that he was with Basil's niece. And when he does that, there's a slight change to the picture. He says the eyes don't look as cruel anymore. And so when he sees that, he decides he's going to change and he's going to do good so that he can reverse the painting and kind of cleanse his soul. But in doing this, he attempts to destroy the portrait. And when he does that, he stabs it and then Dorian dies. And when they come and find him, he looks exactly like the portrait did, and the portrait looks like it never changed. So, like I said, it's pretty much the same as the book, which I was really shocked. The biggest difference, I think, for me, though, when I watched the movie was that Dorian is portrayed very different than how I read him, which is interesting, because in the book, it's more of a question of what is going on in Dorian's head. You don't know why he's doing what he's doing. And to me, that meant, like, he doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing because he has all of these influences and he has no idea what he wants. He's just doing what other people tell him to do. But in the movie, he's kind of portrayed just instantly as, like, this kind of immoral monster. That's pretty much what I have for my notes. Nikki, have you read the book?
I haven't, but I have it, and it's been on my list for a while.
Yeah, it's really good.
It is really good.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the movie. Also, one cool thing that they do in this movie, though, it's just like what they did in Wizard of Oz. It's a black and white movie, but when you see the painting in the beginning, it's in color. And then when you see the painting once it's changed, it's in color. And it's really cool. Because by the end, the painting is like, it's almost psychedelic, the way that it's done. Originally, it's like, you know, really fancy, normal painting, I guess. But by the end, when he looks like monstrous, it's like almost psychedelic. It's really cool.
Like a poster you would buy at Spencer's.
I didn't really consider this movie necessarily horror, but then I found out it was kind of classified that way by some people. I do think it's supernatural, and I think that the movie itself does have more supernatural elements to it than the book does, just simply because they're like, hey, there's this god granting wishes, and Dorian sold his soul to it.
I'm clicking on it. Oy. Yeah, that is a poster from Spencer's. Like, all you need is to set that shit up with a black light.
It's amazing.
You are ready to get so high.
Come to Chicago. This is on display at all times for anyone who's cannot make it for the special exhibit. His Picture of Dorian Gray is in the permanent collection at the Art Institute.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's so intricate, too. It's so...
All of the blood that you see, like, on his hands and on the floor, all of that, I believe, it came after he killed Basil.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, because so the artist, he actually had to paint this painting as they were filming the movie because he had to keep, well, because as Dorian did more stuff, the painting had to get worse and worse and worse. So he had to paint as they were filming to make, I mean, like Miranda said, he had to add the blood after the scene where they would, you know, where he killed Basil. Yeah, so he had to work on it as they were filming. So that they could film it, and then he could add some more stuff, and then they could film it again.
That's really neat.
It's so cool. I do have to say, though, like, when I read the book, I did not picture Dorian to look like the actor that they chose. I was shocked to see that guy playing
How
Dorian.
did you picture him?
I don't know. I feel like he looks older than Dorian was.
For me, Dorian Gray is the Dorian in Penny Dreadful because he did such a fucking amazing job being Dorian Gray.
I find, like, with older movies like this, part of the reason that I don't picture Dorian Gray looking like this is because the guy who played him in the movie was, not that he wasn't good looking, but it's like an old-fashioned good looking.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah, whereas when I picture someone really beautiful, I think of someone who looks like what I would consider a beautiful man today. Right?
That, you know what?
Okay.
Yeah, that probably does have something to do with it. Because when I saw him, I was like, that's not at all what I pictured, mostly because he, to me, wasn't that attractive, and Dorian was supposed to be, like, this incredibly beautiful man that people just swoon over. And I was like, wow.
No, this guy looks like
got.
very 40s attractive.
Exactly.
So I'm sure he was very fitting for the time, I guess.
Yeah, not like, I don't find him attractive. It must be the drastic hair part that gets me, but...
Well, we all made such good choices.
I feel like a lot of our all of our choices are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. They are, and I think that it shows... I think that the horror movies in the 40s definitely show, first of all, there's some austerity, I think, with budgets. Obviously, World War II is going on. But I think that it definitely just continues to show how the horror genre evolved. I mean, it went from these extremely artsy movies to kind of a more popular... I mean, this is when horror was really taking off. I mean, like I said, like with Val Lewton, I mean, RKO gave him an entire horror department because they were like, listen, these things are hits. We got to compete with Universal. And I think a lot of the studios were similar in trying to compete. I mean, again, especially with Universal, which really was the first to capitalize on horror movies. So it's definitely, I think, is when horror starts to take off as kind of a extremely popular movie genre.
I think it started with Frankenstein, if I'm remembering correctly, because when Dracula came out, Dracula was a hit, but it wasn't as much of a hit as Frankenstein, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know which one was the biggest hit.
There was Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and the Mummy, right? Originally?
Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Wolfman, and the Invisible Man.
When did the Creature from the Black Lagoon come in?
Like the 50s.
Oh, okay.
Did the Mummy have a book? Was it based on a book?
No.
Okay. Because I was just about to say that Wolfman is the only one without an original. It's not an adaptation, it's just what it is, but actually it's the Wolfman.
Well, actually, okay, I'm sorry. We were wrong. So the originals were Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, and the Invisible Man. Those all came out in the 30s. Then Bride of Frankenstein. And then in the 40s, the Wolfman. Though the Wolfman ends up becoming, you know, one of the big, like, canon characters. But, yeah, he actually came out a decade later than all... Like, all the other ones were well into their sequels by the time the Wolfman came out.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But, again, you can... So, if you were to be like me and go to the Wikipedia page for Universal Monsters, I mean, you can see in the 30s they kind of start pumping them out, and then in the 40s it just like doubles from what it was in the 30s.
Yeah.
So you can really see where it takes off. And then, of course, in the 50s, you know, you start to get to all the B movies, and there was a new one coming out every day, most of which are not good.
So that's going to be fun, because the next one we do in this series is 50s.
Oh my god. But I love 50s horror. 50s
I love
horror
50s
is
horror.
fantastic.
I love 50s horror. The 50s horror is split between amazing and, like, not amazing, but hysterical. Like, you only have two choices. It's either great and, like, groundbreaking and, you know, like a big allegory for nuclear war and all that kind of stuff, or it's Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I mean, those are your only two choices.
Oh boy.
But yeah, all good choices, guys. And like I said before, I'll put up a blog post because there are quite a few movies from the 40s that we did not talk about that are also amazing. I'll put that up the day after the episode comes out.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget that you can follow us on pretty much every form of social media. You can find us on YouTube. We're no longer on SoundCloud, but we're on Podbean. We're on iTunes, Google Play. Don't forget that we do have a Patreon if you want to donate to the show. And we also have a giveaway going on. All you have to do is leave a review for us on iTunes. We really appreciate the reviews that we have. But if you listen to the show and you haven't left a review, we'd really appreciate it if you did. And if you do, you're going to go into a drawing. We have some movies that we're giving away, and I have some cool little memorabilia, horror memorabilia to give away. So jump on over to iTunes, leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it, and you could win some cool stuff. So thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.